myself to the stream first. So if you can't hear us in here, you can go out in the lobby and listen to us on YouTube, watch us on YouTube. All right, Robroy, bring us in.
All right. Live from Fairbanks, Alaska, the second annual Boreal Bigfoot Expo podcast, Alasquatch, with Larry Beans Baxter, Aleks Petakov, and myself, Robroy Menzies. And now, here's Larry.
All right, guys, thank you so much for coming. We're like, if you can't tell, this is the first time we've done this, or at least the first time I've done this. It's a little bit of a fiasco up here with the wires and stuff. We've got a live feed going out to YouTube. So if you guys don't want your voice broadcast over YouTube, remain silent. If you don't care, feel free to clap.
Yell at us.
Yeah.
Throw tomatoes, whatever.
Yeah,
Take your shirt off and throw it at Robroy.
Please.
Yeah. We're going to be talking a little bit today about Area A and some of the stuff that we've experienced out there. I thought it was a unique opportunity to get us all three in the same room at the same time and talk about some of that stuff going on out there. For those of you that don't know, I think Aleks you're probably going to talk about it in your presentation, correct?
Yeah, I think we're just going to be showing the movie more so than talking about it. But we're going to be doing a Q&A afterwards.
Because I told him during my presentation, like, I'm just going to do a little bit on Area A because you're going to get Area A to death.
Yep. You guys will get it a lot.
Yeah. Yep. So I talked about it a little bit during my presentation. Robroy talked about it during his. Robroy, actually, if you're here at the Boreal Bigfoot Expo here in Fairbanks, Alaska at the Carlson Center, Robroy has a cast at his table of a footprint that was cast at the Area A cabin. We can talk about that here in a little bit. But
three casts.
Yeah, actually, I have 3 casts, but the 2 little
don't
ones.
tell me there were 3 casts.
Yeah.
Don't tell me there were 3 crabs. Oh yeah.
Oh.
They can't hear it, but I just did a rim shot. So anyway, so let's just start down there at the end with Aleks.
Mr. Aleks,
and,
what can you tell us?
Just kind of tell us about your introduction to Area A and some of your thoughts on it and what happened when you went out there, man.
Yeah, so the first time I was introduced to the idea of Area A, I believe was I had you, Beans, on my podcast. Oh gosh, this must have been March or April of 2021. So I had just come back from a trip in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. We were out there with the Olympic Project. And I had heard just, kind of rumors about this place before, but nothing concrete. I had Beans on my show and he told me about this location. And then it was like within a week or two, I got an email from a gentleman named Scott, who is the owner of this property. He said, hey, I've listened to your podcast. I heard the one you had Beans on. He introduced himself essentially. He was originally from the New England area, as I am. He lived in New Hampshire, very close to where I live now, actually. So we had that connection. And basically the story went, this property was very far off the grid in the Kenai Peninsula, over an hour boat ride to basically get there. And just the amount of sounds and stuff he was sending me was very intriguing. And what also intrigued me at the time was David Ellis, who's a researcher with the Olympic Project, was the one who had analyzed a lot of the sounds. Mm-hmm. And having just met David, this was again in 2021, a couple weeks before this, I knew David. I said, oh, David was involved. This makes me even more interested. And I started listening to the sounds, blew my mind. It's a lot of the stuff that you have on the soundboard. If you're here at the Bigfoot Expo, Robroy has it at his table. You can put the headphones on and listen to it. Just the whole story. And Scott was like, hey, if you don't believe me, talk to my friend who had an experience out there. And he was kind of throwing people at me to get me to talk to them. I said, hey, okay. I talked to a number of people who have had experiences, and obviously I was in touch with Beans about it too. And the story seemed very credible. I've done a lot of Bigfoot stuff across the U.S., so you got to be skeptical at times, and you don't believe everything you get told. I've been let down plenty of other times, but this was really intriguing, and I thought it was interesting. And then it wasn't until almost a year later, May of 2022, so just a year ago, that we actually went out there for almost 9 days. Robroy was there for a part of it. Eli, who's outside at our table here at the Expo, was also there, as well as our friend Ron Reed and the property owner Scott and his friend John. And we went out there and had a lot of weird stuff happen. But yeah, that's long story short. That's kind of my introduction to Area A, or the Alaska cabin. We've kind of called it a few different things, but it took about a year, almost from when I heard about it to get out there, and it was pretty much I was looking forward to it the whole year and doing stuff in between. But got to become friends with Scott, and I think he's a great guy. And it's kind of this whole situation just sort of fell into his lap. I'd say he just wanted to build a cabin to go fishing with his friends and enjoy, and weird stuff started happening, as is so often with the subject.
Yeah, he definitely didn't have Bigfoot on the brain.
Nope.
Avid outdoorsman. Hunts, fish.
Do you know why he was so good at hunting?
I think we heard that quite a few
Because
times.
he was hungry.
Yep, he won't let you forget.
No.
So, Rob, tell us about the kind of your introduction to Scott in Area A.
Well, I want to say it was Rob Alley who told me about Scott first and kind of got us hooked up with each other. Rob Alley's another Bigfooter, well-known in Ketchikan. He's wrote some books, pretty good books. But anyway, I got in contact with Scott over the phone. We had a short talk, and I happened to be speaking in Palmer at the muskox farm. And he agreed to meet me there and listen to my presentation, and we would get together afterwards.
Was it better than your presentation here?
Yeah. No, it was good. It was a lot of fun. It was packed, actually. But I met Scott, and he was lingering in the back, very laid back guy, pretty serious. And then once I got to know him, the humor started coming out. He's a great guy, but he did kind of seduce me with the audio.
This is a PG-13 show, by the way.
Well, what did I say? Seduce?
Yeah. I don't know where you're going with it, but it's PG-13.
Yeah, we're not going there, but it was a seduction. I was intrigued. I couldn't believe the audio he was playing me. And those of you who are familiar with the Sierra sounds, it sounded like those. And he agreed. He said, "You got to come out." And I was hoping he would say that too, but he did. I did. I went out there. Again, really, really laid back. I went out there the first time with 3 other guys working on the cabin. But the whole way out there, it's just so pretty out there, Bigfoot or not, it's gorgeous. But immediately started hearing things, not all the time, but we were there for 3 days. I heard my first tree knocks the first night. I talked about that earlier. That to me was really epic. Scott's heard it before. But there was a lot of things I have not experienced that I've now experienced at Scott's, which I'm very grateful for.
So one of the things I want to touch on about I believe it was your first trip out there.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of on the little point there by the
Mm-hmm.
water, and you hear your first tree knock.
Yep.
And something I want to talk about with this is your first tree knock here is there was kind of a unique aspect of it that you don't often hear with a lot of tree knock experiences. So you hear the knock, but then you hear debris falling. So it actually, something, I know there's a lot of debate. Are they actually hitting the trees? Are they making a sound with their mouth? Are they making a sound with their hands?
Yep.
But you actually heard what sounded like debris, like leaves, litter, come out of the tree and fall down.
And I think because it was so quiet that evening, I was the only one out. There was no fire. There's no noise. It was so quiet. I was out there for maybe 2 hours total. And, it was so loud. It was just unbelievable. But it is kind of unique. There's almost, I want to say, 2 different kinds of knocks out there. There's that hollow baseball bat knock. And I talked to Scott about what I heard, my first knocks I heard. And we both kind of agreed it wasn't the hollow baseball bat. It was like a solid wood on wood.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because we were getting to the stuff falling off the trees. It wasn't like super loud, but it was like supernatural. Not supernatural, but just if you hit a tree, stuff's going to fall, especially that hard. If a truck bumped into a tree real hard, stuff's going to fall. And that's easily what I was hearing. It was such a loud whack. And then the second time, the same thing. Very legitimate. It scared me. I have to be honest. It kind of scared me.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your fear.
Mm-hmm.
So you're out there by yourself, or you thought you were by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into that. But you thought you were by yourself.
Yeah.
And you hear this, your first tree knock ever.
Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you say you thought in your mind, when you heard it, you thought that was directed at me.
Yeah, it was definitely. I think what scared me after the second whack, it was exactly like the first one. So it wasn't like a freak thing I'm hearing. I mean, I knew what I heard the first time. It just shocked me. But it was just so loud, and it was just pretty incredible. I want to say I looked at my watch too, and it was 12:30, and it happened right after I thought I better go to bed. And it was like they're reading my mind or something. Not that they're reading my mind, but it took me by surprise. And I mean, it was awesome. It was awesome.
But you weren't alone out there, because
the
owner was actually, he had come out.
Scott, and I didn't hear him. I think I was just shocked. And he walked out. I didn't hear him walk out. He heard the whacks, and then I come not running, but almost running. And then we both, talk to each other. Oh my God. And we also both joke about, wow, the whole time we never once looked through the thermal camera. We were both just too.
Yeah. Oh, I've got a whole story about that with Fort Chatham. It's a thing. But
you were asking about the whole time I was standing there, I did not feel like I was being watched. I didn't feel creeped out. I was actually like, oh boy, I'm not going to hear anything. Yeah. This is my luck. I hear all these stories. Everybody's telling, oh my God, Bigfoot screaming, throwing rocks. I come out here, nothing, just crickets. But boy, was I surprised.
I find it interesting. You mentioned the part about it was like they were reading your mind, because last year we were out there, and I'd been helping around the cabin. I was doing a bunch of work, and I was taking a break, and I was sitting on the swing, and I was just sitting there, and there hadn't been a whole lot going on the last couple of times I've gone out there. And I was sitting on the swing on the porch, and I was like, man. And of course, it's Alaska. It's a beautiful place. People pay good money to go to places like this. And I'm sitting on the porch going, this sucks. Where are the Bigfoot at? It's like Jurassic Park. You plan on having dinosaurs on this tour, right? So I'm sitting on the porch, and I'm kind of bummed. I'm feeling sorry for myself because there's no activity. And it's broad daylight. It's in the afternoon. And as soon as that thought popped in my head, I was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to come out here anymore. Maybe I should concentrate on another area that I have some activity in. As soon as I thought that, one of the crispest, clearest knocks I've ever heard come from behind the cabin. And I don't know, I'm not a woo guy, I'm not into, telepathy, stuff like that. But the fact that you said it's like they were reading my mind. And then as soon as I had that thought about maybe I don't, maybe I should take some time off from the cabin. And then I hear that knock. It's just a weird coincidence. Yeah. But some people say there's no such thing as coincidences. So who knows?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't, I got to take Bigfoot one step at a time. Bigfoot by itself is something crazy.
Let's ease into
he's spiritual and paranormal. That's really,
it's a big leap to make.
Let's ease into the undiscovered primate species,
right?
And then
accept that first.
Then we'll get into
maybe they are. Maybe they have this dimension. I don't know.
Yeah,
but definitely that was a very epic first experience for me.
So, Aleks, you have some unique experiences that Robroy and I don't. As you've looked for Bigfoot all over the United States. I mean, you've been in a lot of different states. Have you been to every state?
I think I'm at I'm narrowing it down to I think 4 or 5 left states, and it's like a cluster of the Midwestern states. But yeah, pretty much most of the rest of the country I've been to.
So some of the areas that you've been to where you've had a lot of activity, what are some things between area A and say another area you've had activity with? What are some areas? Do you see the similarities in those two types of environments?
I mean, the only thing I could say in terms of similarities would be that they are remote places that have plenty of water resources, whether that be flora, fauna, things that are edible and conducive for large animals. A lot of thing I notice is places, especially in northern areas, whether they be where I'm at in Northeast or the Rocky Mountains or parts of Canada, I find that if a place can support moose, which are one of the largest animals on the continent, that's usually a pretty good biological marker, at least for me, in terms of saying, okay, if it's possible to support these 1,200-pound giant, creatures, essentially Pleistocene animals like the moose are, there's probably a chance that a Sasquatch or two might be able to exist in that area, at least in terms of being able to support itself. So that's one of the biggest patterns I've noticed. Other than that, it's been random. I mean, we've had stuff happen. And when I say stuff, I can't say 100% Sasquatch. This is just stuff that fits the purported behavior. So we're talking wood knocks, whoops, strange smells, stuff getting thrown at you, kind of histories of reports. So lots of sightings. So places like Bluff Creek, we've had stuff happen out there. But I think what's interesting about the cabin and that area of the Kenai Peninsula kind of sets it apart is just how remote it is. You don't have the possibility of somebody just say hiking in if it's a state forest or a national forest. Even like in the most remote parts of the lower 48, somebody could technically still hike in there, whereas a place like the cabin, it's very difficult. So you're eliminating a lot of possibility of, well, that was just a human, if I had found a handprints in some cabin somewhere in New Hampshire, I obviously have to consider humans very much so as the culprit, whereas a place like Area A, it's a 50-50 at that point that it's either one of us or there's no other people that are going to be out there, essentially. So, I think the cabin, the area around it kind of in Area A just stands alone. It is that classic temperate rainforest sort of environment, so similar to where you've talked about growing up in the Juneau area. I've seen forests like that down in British Columbia, Washington State, Oregon, all the way up until the redwoods in Northern California. And that's an area that has the most amount of sightings of Sasquatch really on Earth, and some of the probably best habitat on Earth too, in terms of you got marine resources, you've got those inland resources. There's just a lot there. And the Kenai Peninsula, I think, is even more remote than some of these other areas. The only place I could say that matches it similarly would be parts of the BC coast and then up into that Alaskan kind of panhandle. But there's just so much there, and that whole Prince of William kind of sound area, just the history of sightings in that area too. It's very intriguing, and stories. And I was just talking to a gentleman who had kind of grew up in that area and knew of stories. And I don't know if he's in here listening, but he had basically told me, old timers used to say, if you were in the woods and you smelled something weird and made you feel kind of scared, back away. Different than a bear. Bears have their own smell too, but this was something unique, and it's very matter of fact apparently back in the day. So,
wow, that's neat to hear. I have a question for you, Aleks. I mean, you've been doing this a long time. You've heard a lot of weird things. Have you heard something in Area A that you've not heard?
Yes, that's a great question. So obviously some of the recordings, the baby crying sound is probably the most intriguing to me. That's something I still can't wrap my head around. So for folks that aren't aware, there are some of the audio that's been recorded by the property owners of what sounds like crying, baby crying. You can hear it on the board out there that Robroy has. My board. And that was one of the things that initially really intrigued me, especially knowing that it only happened when apparently women were around, and women aren't frequently out at the cabin. So I thought to myself, statistically, what these guys are going out there all the time, right? You guys go out at least a couple times a season. Scott is out there pretty often with buddies, in between work and whatever. Why haven't they heard anything like that when it's all just men there? Why, statistically, if it's some kind of an animal, I would expect this at least to happen. What is it about the presence of females there that causes this? If it is a regular animal, then that's a phenomena that's worth looking into itself. If it's an otter, why was a baby otter crying when there's human females around, right? That's a mystery to me as well. But I haven't heard that audio personally, in my own hearing, but it's just that concept is very intriguing. But one of the things we did hear out there were the mystery gunshot sounds, and that's not something I've heard elsewhere. I've heard wood knocks, I've heard whoops, I've heard other stuff in other parts of the U.S., but the mystery gunshot seemed to happen. And you guys were talking about kind of your mind being read, but stretching to kind of coincidences. These mystery gunshots would happen when we were doing something, when somebody steps out of the cabin, or when we stepped out of the wood line to get back into the boat to come back to the other side of the bay. Right. These guys thought we shot a gun, and they came out to rescue us in the boat and say, "Hey, did you guys shoot a gun?" Wasn't us. And then one day I happened to step out. Everyone was sleeping. I think this was after you had left when we were there on our visit. Everyone was sleeping, taking like an afternoon nap. And I walk out on the deck, and it was a hazy or like a foggy day. So it was really cool because we had beautiful weather out there. It was very sunny. That was the only day where it was a little bit of rain drizzling and that spooky kind of coastal ambiance. Yeah. And I was just getting some video of it, and I see the sea line in the bay, and I just happen to start filming it. And I hear just what sounds like a gunshot from kind of behind me, but the whole bay is almost like a sound amphitheater. So it's hard to tell where it came from. But I thought, okay, that's kind of weird. I go back in the cabin, and one of the other guys, John,
Mhm.
he says, "Did you just hear that?" Because he's upstairs in the bunk with his in one of the rooms with the window open. I said, "Yeah, I did hear that." He said, "Well, I just heard two more as you were walking in." So I said, "Okay, that's kind of interesting." And that sort of stuff happens pretty coincidentally. I talked to David Ellis about it, who had again analyzed some of that initial audio that Scott had sent, and what he noticed about the sound was, if you take a gunshot sound and you look at it in a spectrogram analysis, where you're essentially looking at the finer details of it, it's a pretty complex process, and David certainly knows more than I do. But he says you look at a gunshot, technically there's two sound waves that come with it. There's an initial boom and the after boom. To the human ear, that just sounds like one gunshot. That just sounds gunshot. That's it, right? Well, this sound only has one boom. There two characteristics don't show up, and that's something he's talked about in other parts of the U.S. that he's looked into. That sort of thing happens pretty frequently. So I thought that was intriguing, and it happened twice. This mystery gunshot thing while we were out there. So I don't know what that is. People say, "Oh, glacier ice cracking." I mean, maybe, but it's so.
I heard it in
Glacier's a long ways
Washington.
away.
I heard it in Washington State. There was no glaciers there.
Right.
So,
Well, it's interesting. What about the rocks we heard thrown and hitting the rocks and hitting the water? Have you ever heard that before?
So I've not heard that before. I think just simply because of the coastal nature of where
Yeah.
we were. I mean, I've heard
It's not a sandy
rocks
beach.
being thrown. I've heard that kind of stuff before in other areas. I've had 7 or 8 different objects hurled at my kind of near my tent in Vermont in the mountains after hearing wood knocks. And it is what it is. But this was interesting. So we're all hanging out up at the upper fire pit. This will be in the film, by the way, which we'll be showing here in a little bit. And we're goofing out at this point. It's been a couple hours.
Oh yeah.
Robroy's doing impressions. I mean, he's one of the funniest people I've ever met. So, yeah, I had to cut out the audio prior to this incident because, we're just goofing off. And
We were pretty loose. weren't
Yes.
we? I mean, we were just
There's a lot
flat
of
out
choice
laughing,
words.
belly laughing.
it was not a PG-13
Yes.
outing.
we won't repeat that. But
It was
essentially,
funny.
we're just sitting there goofing off. And, everyone's got a thermal or a camera in their hands. And we're sitting around the fire. And then all of a sudden, I just hear this really clunky kind of knock just come through, and I said, "Oh, shh, everyone stop." And we all stop, and we proceed to hear what sounds like what I can only describe as rocks falling or being thrown and hitting stuff along the way, and then smashing against rocks and then splashing into the water. Not just a sea lion splashing in the water where you hear that sort of splash. We heard that too. We heard, believe me, we heard plenty of sea lions. I'm like a sea lion audio expert at this point after hearing all the overnight audio of them going, "Oh," in the middle of the night. You think, "Oh, you got something?" No, it's a sea lion. But these rocks were really weird, and we tried to replicate it. And it really, I had to throw these rocks down onto the beach and let them smash into the rocks and into the water. But the whole area is mossy, so the idea that something rolled down, we tried to roll rocks down. We couldn't find any rocks aside from the beach
Yeah, you had
and
to look
our
for
fire
them.
pit.
That's the other thing.
That's
There's
what's
the
so
rocks.
weird.
You go into the woods. You cannot just find a rock. You got to look for them up there. Everything's moss.
There was an instance where somebody, I can't remember if it was you or maybe Scott, found like a little cache of rocks.
Yeah, I did the first time I went out there. I noticed there were like 3 rocks in a stack. Kind of odd. I thought, but they don't look natural. Look like somebody put them there. Okay, walk a little ways longer and kind of off trail, and there's a few more rocks just sitting there. Now there are stumps that tip over and expose dirt and rocks, but these were just sitting there, so it was a little odd. Unless it, people setting them out, collecting them, setting them out. But being that we've heard rocks being thrown, I've heard them twice now. The first time I was woken up, it was about 3 a.m, and they were throwing rocks in the water, and they were to the right of, if we're standing on the deck, they were to the right, and they were like throwing rocks at the skiff.
Yeah.
And we all ran out there, and when Scott, and I think it was a guy named Josh, ran out, I think they were still splashing. But as soon as they got out there, it stopped. And of course, that's when I walked out. Maybe it was because I walked out.
And they found them in the boat before.
Yeah. So it's not an uncommon thing out there, but it is
Also, the flat
distinctive.
rock that was when we showed up on our visit last year. There was up by the upper fire pit. There was this flat rock just kind of sitting there. You remember that?
Yeah.
And we said, "Who put that there?" And
just
Scott
sitting
couldn't
there.
figure it out.
No, I didn't put it there. You didn't put. I don't know.
It could just be, that's sort of a happenstance kind of thing. It's really hard to say one way or another, but the rock throwing thing out there seems to be common. The first story Scott ever told me was seeing a football-sized rock horizontally fly out of the trees into the water. That was one of his first things that he observed out there, and then finding the small netted rocks that they would use to weigh down fishing nets. They just take a rock from the beach, cover it in these plastic nets, and you can find them everywhere now, littering the shores.
Yeah.
Have a few at home. I kept them as like the squatch rocks, as Robroy calls
Did
them.
you bring any?
I did not.
What?
I've got a fresh batch I'm producing, but I sell them in my gallery for $13.99.
Plug, yeah. But those are cool because those are the ones that they would find inside the boat. Like Scott would talk about, they're going back to port, and they'd hear these noises at night, right? It's a clunk sound or some kind of what sounds like a knock. On their way back to port, then they would just find these rocks inside the boat as they're cleaning it up and say, "How the heck did this get in there?"
It seems that they're whatever it is fascinated with metal, metal on metal, making a metal sound, and it's interesting because that's not something that you can find in nature.
Right.
It's something they can only make happen when the boats are around or whatever. And it seems like it's something that is dependent on us kind of to provide the material for them to make that sound, and it's fascinating. And then there's the storied war between Scott and whatever was tearing up his outhouse.
Oh,
when they first got
the
there.
outhouse incident.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, the bathroom being, they clearly didn't like the bathroom from the beginning, it sounds like.
Which sounds very territorial.
Yes.
I don't want you pooping in my living room or whatever,
But to literally rip the toilet seat off this plywood box would take some kind of strength. Certainly,
Even if it was a bear, you'd expect more markings.
The box would be moved, it'd be torn up. I mean, you'd have to hold down the box, and pull on that toilet seat. It just seems crazy, but it happened more than once. Another thing was the footprint we found next to the bathroom. An hour prior to me finding it, Scott said something growled at him while he was going to the bathroom, and there were 7 of us there at the time. 4 younger guys, and the younger guy, we're all kind of out. He says, something just growled at me. Comes out of the trail, and his eyes were pretty big. You could tell he was excited. And we all, the usual, was it a bear, a sea lion? He's like, no, he's getting kind of frustrated with us. Okay, we're all like, oh, I don't know. We didn't hear anything. So about an hour later, I go up to use the bathroom, and doing my business, and I look over down. Now, we just moved the bathroom over, so this is one of these, you dig a hole, you put the box over, and then when you're done with that, you fill the hole, you dig a new hole. So we just dug a new hole. There was fresh dirt to the left, and I just kind of glanced down, and there it was, about a 16-inch footprint. I mean, I could clearly see the toes, the foot, and I did say out loud, "You got to be kidding me," because I've been out here several times and looking, and here it is. It just kind of came to me. I didn't have to do anything but go to the bathroom, and there it was. And I was very skeptical. I even took a video of it right when I found it, and you can hear my voice calmly saying, well, I guess it could be a couple guys stepped in the same place, but I was kind of in denial. Oh, you can see the toe. The big toe was freakishly big. I walked down. I asked the boys, yeah, where's Scott? Oh, he's in the shed. Okay, go in the shed. Hey, Scotty. He's like, hey, what's up? I said, I think I found a track. Where? I said, by the bathroom. Let's go. He was psyched. And we go up there. I won't exactly say what he said, but he was excited. And he got down on his hands and knees 12 inches from the track. And he said, that's a booping wood ape. That's got booping toes. And at that point, the relief, I can get excited. Because it was. You looked at it. We got pictures of it. We took the cast. The cast is sitting on my table up there. I encourage you all to look at it.
The unconventional casting method you use.
So, being that Scott's not a Bigfoot guy, but he's a smart guy. The first time he found tracks at his cabin, he did not have plaster Paris. He's not thinking that. But what he did have was spray insulation. And he's building a cabin, so he sprayed spray insulation in the best track. He found, I think he said 8 tracks going through the mud. Classic in a row. He had to really stretch his legs out to make, he said it was incredible. So they sprayed the best track with the spray insulation, and it kind of worked. I actually have that as well. It's in my car. I didn't bring it out, but the size of it, the shape, you can see the heel, you can see where the big toes is. It's got this arch kind of thing. It's like this deep in the mud. It's pretty cool. But the cast, so plaster Paris, he had one little thing of plaster Paris when we found that second print. And I've never cast a footprint before. I should probably be in that class, but now I've done it a couple, but I was super excited. I remember being super excited, living the dream, all these Bigfoot documentaries I've seen in there. I'm stirring the plaster and I'm like, I almost crying. And we go up and the reality setting in, it was just this little thing of plaster there. So it was not much. And I know the size of the print and I'm stirring it going, Scotty, I don't think this isn't going to be enough. He's like, oh, I think you're right. And I said, spray insulation. Oh, yeah. So we poured all that plaster. It took all of it to cover the foot. And then we took the spray insulation and sprayed on top of it to keep it together. And anybody knows spray insulation, it balloons up like a big marshmallow. The thing got this tall. I'm not kidding. And I was laughing. We took a sawed off the excess, and sure enough, it worked. We pulled it. It's wonderful. You can see dermal ridges, what appears to be dermal ridges, I should say. On the pads, you can see some strange texture. It's been looked at by a couple of other people, and they claimed that it looks legit. And being that we know the story behind it, there was no shenanigans. I don't know. You guys go look at it and you tell me.
So that was you pulled a MacGyver.
Pulled a MacGyver.
You didn't have enough plaster.
Not enough plaster, and I know it was thin. It was super thin. It would have cracked.
Yeah.
But he has tons of them.
Some of these younger people are like, "What's a MacGyver?"
It should be on duct tape, I think. But yeah, so that was kind of that story. Beautiful, man. I held on to that cast too. The boat ride back. Oh, I'm like, this thing is. I was holding it. And did not want that thing braked. And I built a little frame for it in my frame shop so I could display it. And then it was that around that time I finished the frame, have it in my store. Awesome! I'm so thrilled. I own the Bigfoot Art Gallery. How happy can you be? It's like, oh, look at that! I know what's going on. I found it. It's awesome. So Scotty finally brings in the first cast that he did out of the spray insulation, and I've never seen it. He's told me about it, but I've never seen it. And I had the one that I found in the cast, and right here, he sets this down next to him. We're looking at it. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's pretty. But you can see a heel. You can see where the heel is, and you can see where the big toe is. And as we're looking at this thing and we're talking about it, I kind of glance over at the other cast, and it was like a puzzle. It fit perfectly. You roll it over and stick it on the other. It fit perfectly. The toe, where everything marked right, was as wide, as long, and we thought, you think we got the same creature 2 years in a row, and we've got a right foot and a left foot? It's kind of interesting. At least that's what I'd like to think, but I don't know what else. We don't have feet that big out there.
No.
Scott's reaction to it was 100% genuine. So,
yeah. Well, full disclosure though, we did a couple of years ago. We did cast a track out there and then determined it was a boot print.
Helly Hansen.
So it does happen. Yeah. Not everything is Bigfoot.
No.
Yeah.
You could clear, and I'm telling you, when we made that boot track, we looked at it, and by this time Scott has like pounds of plaster Paris out there. Now he's like, oh, I'm not doing this mistake again. So we're kind of looking at this track, and it does look a little interesting. It's in this super muddy spot at the property. Not like nobody would really step in there, but I guess it's possible. So Scotty's all cast it anyway. You guys need to practice. So we're like, oh, yes, sir. So we get in there. We did, and we do. So we cast it up, and it was so obvious it was a boot.
But I couldn't tell until we got it out of the ground.
After we got it out, and we could look at it, you could take a Helly Hansen boot, just flip it over, and go, yeah.
Yeah,
it's a good learning experience.
It was good. I'm glad we did it.
So
I actually wish I would have kept that one and put it in my store.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been a good.
Look, this reel is a boot.
Right. It's interesting because you get that detail that comes out when you get the print out. I've had times too where you've got a track and it's kind of hard to see something, but then when you lift it, a little bit more detail is revealed.
Yeah,
I think Meldrum could probably talk about that a little more.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left here. Aleks, I know we can't get out of here. We're talking about Area A. We can't get out of here without talking about the handprint.
Yeah. So the handprint was really interesting. So there's been a lot of talk in the Sasquatch research community about handprints and possibility of there being an oily substance kind of that apes have. So humans have it as well as other gorillas. And it's kind of like when you're sweaty and you leave a little bit of impression on something.
Doug Hychek calls it alba vernix.
Alba vernix, yeah. Doug Hychek, Shelley Covington, some other researchers have kind of coined that term, Sasquatch alba vernix. And the idea is maybe these creatures have a stickier hand substance. And it's something that's been reported on other parts of the country and other parts of North America too. But one day, I think it was the second to last day, it was the same day as the mystery gunshots. I'm going to the back of the cabin in the woods just to switch out some audio recorder batteries because we've got audio recorders going the whole time out there. Just because you really never know out there if anything happens. Hey, it's okay. We can go review it 3 hours in. That's where it happened. We have the audio. So I'm going to switch the batteries out and I'm getting back to the cabin and I'm thinking, man, look at the metal siding on this cabin. You know, it looks pretty nice. And I just start walking the side of it, and I see right under the window, which is the bunk room, where there's 3 beds, and that's kind of where usually most people sleep in. And that's where there's been incidents in the past of something trying to break in before the cabin was built, or fully built. And I see this weird-looking handprint just kind of in this strange, awkward position, right around eye level, maybe just a little under, if I can recall, just there, this kind of weird looking. The fingers looked in like strangely positioned. And I thought, okay, that's kind of odd. So I start looking around the rest of the cabin, didn't find anything else like it. So then I go get Scott, I get everyone else. I say, hey guys, I found this weird handprint. Let's just go check it out. And we all go look at it and we're starting to look at it and say, this is actually kind of unusual. And we're trying to compare, you know, where all of us kind of had average sized hands out there. There weren't any ones that were freakishly tall or freakishly short or anything. So, this hand seemed to go from palm to finger. It was a couple inches longer than my hand. Nothing crazy, but it just looked weird in the where it was. And I thought to myself, okay, well, I don't have the right tools to collect this evidence right now. I'd rather get somebody who does. So eventually Beans came out. I think it was like less than 2 weeks after.
Yeah, it was like, it wasn't a super quick turnaround, but it was like 7-8 days. Something like that.
It was like,
and it was still
very clear,
super visible.
So we had Beans go out there and he collected it, and you took swabs and you also lifted the print. And basically he did what he would do if this was a kind of a crime scene investigation. They're trying to ID somebody. And the handprint is just interesting. I still look at it and there's days where I'm saying, okay, it's very convincing. I say, okay, maybe it's human, but the thing about it that I like those odds, it's 50-50. I mean, it's 50%. It's
not a bear.
Yeah. There's no confusing with the local fauna or anything like that. It is 50% either one of us or something human-like, which supposedly are not supposed to be in Alaska. So that's the mystery of it.
Yeah. And, we were back there the year before, and we were installing the gutters and putting in the rain catcher system. I mean, for a person's handprint to stay there and it faded from the time you found it to when I found it, but it was still visible. But for it to have been put there the year before when we were back there working and to last that long and then to all of a sudden start to fade right after you find it,
that doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make a lot of sense.
It really doesn't.
And I remember when you guys told me about it, I walked back there and I looked at it. When I first saw it, I was kind of like, I thought I didn't really think much of it. So at first glance, it looks like a handprint, although it was kind of on the whitish side, I want to say, that oily stuff. But when I looked really close at the thumb, remember it was the thumb.
You couldn't really see much of a thumb.
Well, it was the dermal ridges were kind of strange, wasn't it?
Yeah,
they were like straight across versus
that's
ours
what
that
it was.
Circular.
The whole thing had these really clear dermal ridges, and I have pictures of it. If anyone wants to swing by our table, and it'll be in the film later too. The full documentation and Beans lifting it too. It was just weird, and we sent it off to Doug Hychek. We showed it to David Ellis, and one of the first, I think, Scott had texted David Ellis with the InReach, Garmin InReach, and the first thing David asked was there. How visible was the thumb? And not very visible. Okay, that's interesting. That's something that a lot of other people talk about for whatever reason, the thumb not being there. But for where it was, the position you would have to have been in would have been putting your right arm down in this really awkward position, and there was the water tank or something. So you'd have to get over that. It just was a really strange place for a person to be, but that bunk room is right there. So maybe that's an interest. I mean, I know when we were there, we kept the window open and the the shade's not on, and Scott says no one really ever does that. Everyone's scared of something coming in, especially since they had something try to break in during the first year. So I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. I sent the handprint off to a couple of people who do primate dermatoglyphics, which are those lines you have in your hand. If you look at your hand right now, you'll see that. And the consensus was human-like, most likely, probably a human. Oh, if you're out there doing hard labor, the pores in your hands and those lines will be more visible. But the only way we could replicate anything like that was putting lotion on your hand and pressing it up against the side of the cabin for it to stick for that amount. I mean, humans, I don't think, produce as much oil as even some of the other primates. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I know Scott recently, one of the last trips he made, he found more, not a defined handprint like you found, but he found more similar marks next to the window. Yeah.
Like up above and higher.
I don't know. I wonder, my theory is that it's probably happening after we leave, and maybe they're slapping the cabin or something to see if there's anybody inside or to get a reaction. That's my personal theory. Is it's probably happening when nobody's there. But it's interesting. It's always in around that same room where the cooler story happened. For those of you that heard my presentation earlier, where the cooler got shoved across the room, and it's it's behind the cabin, so there's easy egress up the hill. It's an interesting story. I don't know. I don't know. So let me ask you guys this as we start to wrap it up. Just kind of give me we'll go down the line again. Give me your final thoughts on one, what do you think is going to happen out there? And two, what are your hopes for Area A? And then what do you think is going to happen out there?
Oh, that's a tough one.
That's a loaded question there.
We're going out there for the next couple weeks soon here. I think just last year almost to me felt like a scouting trip. We kind of learned to lay the land a little bit, figured out, well, okay, maybe this is an area we want to focus in on. My hope is that we're able to get some kind of visual documentation, but also pair that with, say, a handprint or a footprint or maybe some hair that we're able to send off. There's a guy doing a pretty broad DNA study on alleged Sasquatch samples right now, and I'm in communication with him, and he's welcome to take any samples we find. So I'm hoping we find, not if you got a thermal video, that'd be great, but nowadays in the age of AI, that's not going to be good enough. But if you're able to get a piece of footage, couple that with DNA and another part of it, some kind of other evidence, visual or audio or something like that, you have 3 layers essentially of a piece of evidence to corroborate one sort of incident. So that's my hope, that we get something interesting. We're going to be trying a lot, the baby crying stuff. We're going to have a female researcher with us as well. And I'm really hoping to kind of experiment with that and see if that has any effect on this weird baby crying thing. Still is one of the things that intrigues me the most about Area A, but I'm hopeful, and I guess we'll have to see. But either way, we'll be documenting it quite heavily as we're out there.
Yeah, I agree. Boy, there's times out there where I think the last trip, I'm almost to the point we'll never see them out there. I just think they're too stealthy. And I'm not saying I hope that we do. My hope is I get to see one. I finally get verification, get to see one, which is why I participate and go out there as much as I can. But after I've been out there a number of years, I'm kind of that the way of the land there, they'd already know we're coming before we're there, because they're up high. The cabin is low, everything up behind it is up high, so they instantly have an advantage. The way the terrain just kind of goes up and down, there's trees and there's things everywhere. It just, like, I could be standing 10 feet away from beans and literally just duck down in this little dip.
We've done little experiments out there where somebody will walk a little ways and just sit down or lay down, and they're just gone.
So it gets a little frustrating because we spend a lot of eyes on out there and we don't see anything, but then you hear stuff. Then we put a recorder out at night and we get all kinds of stuff. And but to see something, so I think that's the next level. I mean, I'm not trying to say I won't, but gosh, it's kind of discouraging because you hear them, you don't see them.
You can just say you don't believe, Robroy.
Oh, I believe.
That's the easy way out.
I just want to see one. Just let me see
Same
one.
here. I'm right in the same boat with it.
That's it.
This
That
topic
simple.
can be very disappointing, but very rewarding, small percentage of the time.
It definitely would take a lot of, you'd have to be so lucky to just step out there one day and see one. I just can't see that happening.
I'm same boat. I say I'm in this for myself. I know that the likelihood of me proving it to the world is probably not going to happen. But if I could prove it to myself, that would
That's all
that
I
would
really want
satisfy
to
me.
do is just a verification.
Even if the DNA samples I collected, if those come back when and if we get the results, if those would come back as something other than human, that would probably be enough for me right there. But it's because I was so involved with the collection process and I know it was done right.
Right.
And if we could get I told my wife, I was like, depending on those results, we're going to get some champagne. So,
Yeah, no
because that would
kidding.
probably be it for me. I'd be
Yeah.
like, they're real. That's it. And so,
It's a good milestone.
Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, guys, we're going to have to clear out of here so that the next speaker can come in. If you're in the Fairbanks area, come and see us. We're going to be here till, I think doors close here at 6 p.m., but we're going to be here all day again tomorrow. We've got a lot of exciting things going on tomorrow. Tomorrow, Dr. Meldrum speaking.
Oh boy.
There's going to be some more small town monster shenanigans. I believe Red Grossinger is going to speak tomorrow. It's going to be a fun time. We look forward to seeing everybody that's here today. Back tomorrow. Hope you're enjoying this. Thank you for staying on this live first ever history making at the Boreal Bigfoot Expo live Alasquatch podcast. And we're going to get out of here. Thank you so much for coming. Feel free to clap for these guys. Aleks, Petakov, Robroy, Menzies, I, Beans Baxter. Thank you guys so much and have an excellent day.
Awesome. That went great.
All right.